God of grace, we ask that you would speak to us a new word, that you would remind us that our lives matter to you and to our world. To that end, may the words of my mouth be even more important. May the meditations of our hearts please you, O Lord, for you alone are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. In the story from the book of Acts that Matt read earlier, the early church was struggling with growing pains. It experienced an almost idyllic beginning, astonishing growth, harmony, a deep sense of common purpose. As the writer put it, they spent time together in the temple, they broke bread in their homes and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. But all of that gladness and joy came to a screeching halt when a formal complaint was lodged. Some of the widows, the most vulnerable, were being neglected in the daily distribution of food, and they were hungry. Having the goodwill of all the people at heart, the apostles then gathered the early community and they asked for help. They could not do it all on their own. And so they asked the church to choose from among them 7 who would share in their leadership. The ones they chose were to be full of the Spirit and of wisdom, who would take on the organization of food distribution so that everyone would be well cared for. The church chose from among them the 7 they wanted to lead them, the church's first deacons. The apostles prayed over the 7 and laid their hands on them, just as we will be doing in a few minutes as we ordain, install, and recommission those you have elected to serve as elders and deacons for this church. It is an act that we can be rather blasé about, forgetting that the opportunity to choose one's leaders rather than having them imposed from on high has been a radical notion over the history of the world. We forget that dictatorships and monarchies are still the norm in many corners of our own globe. The practice of the early church of electing its local leadership was revolutionary, and it actually worked quite well. The church continued in that vein for a couple of centuries before adopting the familiar secular model of top-down power. Then as now, emperors and kings and popes were not exactly thrilled about relinquishing that power. But the radical notion that communities ought to be able to select their leaders and give them authority would not go away. In 16th century Geneva, our own John Calvin, father of the Presbyterian Church, because he read his Bible, insisted that governments, be they public or church governments, were to be elected by the people. The version of American history I was given in high school left out the important fact that from the British side of things, the American Revolution was called the Presbyterian Rebellion. Presbyterians and those who thought like them, embracing the radical theology that rejected the divine right of kings, were tossed out of England and began to make their way to the colonies en masse, carrying with them the theology of John Calvin and his pupil John Knox. The great unpleasantness of the American Revolution was blamed on those blasted Presbyterians. From the Declaration of Independence all the way through to the Arab Spring, this notion of the fundamental human right of people to choose their leaders continues to drive societies and speak to our basic human longings. And to think that the seeds of how things ought to work in the world were planted in the earliest church. Not only the selection of leaders by the people, but also the spirit and heart with which that leadership was to be exercised. Note that the first leaders were selected not to grab power for themselves or to line their own pockets, but rather to wait on tables. In other words, to care for the poor and the most vulnerable, to make sure that there was fair and equal distribution of basic human necessities, to act in the best interests of the entire community. True leaders were to serve the people. Robert Greenleaf, then a researcher at AT&T, is credited with coining the phrase servant leadership and founding the modern servant as leader movement back in the last century. It emerged from his growing suspicion that power-centered, authoritarian leadership style, so prominent in the United States institutions, was not working. He explained servant leadership this way. The servant leader is servant first. Becoming a servant leader begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve. That person is sharply different from the one who is leader first. The difference manifests itself in the care taken by the servant to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served. And the test is this. Do the ones I serve grow as persons? Do they, while I am serving, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? To use the words of Holy Scripture, is the goodwill of all the people their starting point. John Ortberg tells the story of a conversation that one of his friends had on an airplane one day. His friend boarded a plane and walked through the business class section on his way to coach. He could tell by their laptops and lively conversation that a group of people sitting together all worked for the same company and they were having a very good time. He made his way into coach and found his own seat. And he could see that the man sitting next to him worked for the very same company as those he had passed on his way to the back. He asked him, "Doesn't it bug you that those guys who work for the same company are sitting in business class and you are stuck here in coach?" Well, the man answered, "They all work for the company. I own the company." He explained that he had inherited this company from his father. And when he took over, everyone kept him at rather cool distance. And when he asked around, he found out that his father had treated everyone around him like gophers. It was all about him. He gave orders, they took them. He got the best, they got leftovers. And so the son decided he would do things differently. He was the owner, but he would devote himself to their flourishing. And he decided that even though he was the one in charge, he would seek to serve rather than to be served. He decided that even though he was the owner, he would fly coach so that they could fly business. Ortberg's friend ended with these words. The truth, he was the happiest guy on the plane. You have elected from your community elders and deacons to lead you by serving you. Once again, you blasted Presbyterians and called leadership from your own midst to guide, not to command, to serve, not to be served, to be little Christs to you, to devote themselves to the flourishing of this community. In just a moment, they will be asked, will you seek to serve the people with energy, intelligence, imagination, and love? And they are prepared to respond in the affirmative. And you will then be asked, do you agree to encourage them, to respect their decisions, and to follow as they guide you, serving Jesus Christ who is alone is head of the church. And I trust that you are prepared to respond in the affirmative. And then we'll participate in the same rite used almost 2 millennia ago when our first servant leaders were elected. We will lay hands on them and pray for them and charge them with the responsibility of leading us in the ways of Christ. Let us pray. Loving Lord, who came not to be served but to serve, you have this day chosen through us, women and men, to serve, to guide, to love, to see that this community flourishes. We thank you for the gifts, for the wisdom, the faith that flows through this congregation, and for the opportunities you give each of us to use them in your service, and in the service of our beautiful, broken world. Amen and amen.